1,201 students. I don't know why we had one extra student, right? And we collected this in a couple of different ways. There was an online Google form, so the survey itself was exactly the same and was basically a derivation of Sue Rankin's work, that sort of the seminal work on LGBTQ college students in general, but those are college students that were largely at four-year universities, and so many of the questions were not germane to community college students. For example, are your resident assistants welcoming? We don't have on-campus housing. That's not relevant to our discussion. So it was collected through an online Google form and in-class data collection. We tried to go to basically the core classes that folks have to take on campus. We contacted faculty members. We asked them if we could come to their classes, and we collected data that way. We also collected data face-to-face in the student center by sending out research assistants and asking them to do that as well. 581 of them were collected through the online form, and 620 were collected through face-to-face interactions. So just to give you sort of a way of understanding this, and I apologize that this is covering the other word, this is what our campus climate study looked like, and this is the data that we have from CCC Apply for ARC, excluding McClellan and the Safety Center because of the skew in the data there. So what you see is that more people who were female identified participated in the campus climate study than we have overall, but pretty close in numbers. If you look at race and ethnicity, some of the differences that you'll see are also that we asked about race and ethnicity in ways that were different than CCC Apply does. There are some problematic elements in the ways in which they ask that information, but you can certainly look at this for comparison, and I'm happy to send the full, I've sent it out before, but I can send it to you again, the full text of the study to you directly if you are interested. And then because it came up as an issue, whether or not more people who identified with the community filled out the online form than face-to-face form, and probably not surprising to anyone, given the stigmatization, more people who were on the queer spectrum or trans spectrum were more likely to fill out the online form than did their face-to-face form. All right. So here are some of the demographics that we see, and I apologize, those numbers, the little boxes get moved over. So when we collapsed identity, so we asked people to indicate, for example, their sexual orientation on a lot of different, right, asexual, bisexual, pansexual, or fluid, gay or lesbian, heterosexual or straight, queer, or multiple sexual identities indicated, meaning they checked more than one of those boxes. So those were the individual ones, so 63.4% of folks indicated that they were heterosexual or straight. Now, if they indicated that they were heterosexual or straight and another identity, they would not be counted in heterosexual or straight. They would be counted in multiple sexual identities indicated. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? Other, just so that we all understand, which is about 2.3% of the sample here, was generally excluded from any of the analysis. You found a gamut of things that people would indicate for other, right? Sexual orientation. We had someone who checked human loving. Okay, I don't know what that means, but cool, right? Some people would write things like normal. I have no idea what that means. We don't make assertions for our research respondents, right? So if they wrote, I love men, we didn't go back and look at what we just put them in other and called it good, okay? All right. And then queer spectrum then was anybody, excluding the other category, right? Because those were just excluded from the analysis. Anybody who indicated a sexual orientation that was not exclusively heterosexual or straight. Okay, so you fell on the queer spectrum if you said, oh, I'm heterosexual or straight, and by the way, I'm also pansexual, bisexual, or fluid. That counted as being on the queer spectrum. And when we look at that, we see that about 36.6 or almost 37% of our respondents, right, indicate that they fall on the queer spectrum. Okay. When we asked folks whether or not they hid their sexual orientation, so the original study by Sue Rankin asked, did you conceal your identity? We did some pre-testing of questions by really going to the research methods classes I used to teach or now taught by somebody else and asked them to pre-test the questions. Are any of these questions confusing? Do you have any questions, whatever? Concealed tended to be a difficult question for some of our students to understand. They didn't know what the word concealed meant. They were more comfortable with the word hid. Okay, so we changed that to hid. And we asked them, have you ever hid your sexual orientation from fellow students or from your professors? Okay, and what we see is, yeah, a lot of them, right? So about 31% of students are saying that they hide or have hidden their sexual orientation from their fellow students. And about almost 38% say they hide it from their professors or have hidden it from their professors. To be clear, we did not ask why they chose to hide their sexual orientation. We can make some inferences, but we did not ask them the reasons behind the hiding of their sexual orientation. We did ask them, have you ever been mistreated because of your sexual orientation? This was a binary answer, yes or no. And then they were given the opportunity to say something about that experience. So we asked them, to the degree to which you feel comfortable, could you tell us about that experience or those experiences? Some people said yes, they were mistreated and chose not to give any narrative example, that's fine, and many gave some narrative examples. And what we see, yay for us, right, is the rates of maltreatment are low. But if we look at the rates of maltreatment, what we see is more maltreatment or mistreatment is occurring from students to students than from professors to students. And this should probably come as zero surprise to us. Yes. Right, so one thing may be, right, we did see higher rates of hiding from professors. So if they're hiding more from professors, there's less opportunity for those things to happen. But as we kind of looked at it, sort of what we see occurring, what we think is occurring based on the narratives that we're given, is that things are happening in the classroom between students. Students are saying stuff to other students. Right? They're saying names or asking inappropriate questions, those kinds of things.
And not necessarily just within class.
And not necessarily within class. And when we say in class, this gets a lot more complicated in our current educational system, correct? Whereas, I mean, all of us know, and we've looked at the data, and we're all kind of aware, right, that online classes are increasing in number, and the enrollments in said classes are increasing in number, right? That's still a classroom, right? Yet we can see interactions in that universe that can be problematic. Okay. So here are some of the context, just to give you an idea of what some of the students were saying, really sort of pick these out randomly. I've been in some class where other students have openly talked about how they think sexual orientation and gender orientation, I didn't change anybody's words, does that make sense? Some of the, okay, are either disgusting or wrong. Professors did little to stop it despite expressed concerns by other students. It's why I keep my own orientation myself, because in my experience, the professors aren't going to do anything to stop it. Been told by students in class that my sexual orientation is not valid, not something I share as a result. Right, and so this year, actually, in our BSS division, one of the things that we launched as a center in response to the data we found, which really pretty clearly indicated that what was going on was that things were said in the classroom or the overall tenor or tone. Does that make sense? So it might not be that a student is saying something directly to another student, but is making a broad comment, right, about a member of a group or group membership. And professors feel ill-equipped to handle it. And so they say nothing. Not because they don't care, not because they don't want to, but because they have few skills and training around what to do when this occurs. And so we have launched the sort of bias and maltreatment training through the center. So what do you do, right? And one thing, don't say nothing. right? When we say nothing in response to these comments, what does every other student think? That you're okay with it, you're down with what's just been said. It's usually not the case. It's usually discomfort on the part of the professor, right? I don't know what to say. I don't know how to handle this. I'm going to move on and get back to whatever it is I'm going to talk about, right? So we got to say something. Yes? Yeah. So we talk a lot in that training actually about some preemptive things, community agreements, statements. In my own class, I teach human sexuality in addition to the work that I do here, so this really comes up all the time, right? I role play the student and the professor and walk through kind of like, okay, so if I was the student and I'm like, Emily, I don't understand. Why are people gay? Is that an okay question or not okay question? Then my students like look around, get sweaty, start hyperventilating. I'm like, that's an okay question, right? Like, that's why we're here. We're here to talk about this. I don't have an answer. I can't give you a recipe, but I can tell you about the research and we can talk about that. Okay, how about this? Gay people are bad and they're all going to burn in hell. Bad, right? And then they go, oh, okay, I see the difference, So we kind of role play what is appropriate and not appropriate. Yes, so community agreements in your syllabus, a welcome letter. I send a welcome letter before my class, a week before the welcome letters, and it talks a lot about my teaching philosophy, about social activism, about social justice, and where I come from, right? So one of my students said I always do sort of a debrief at the end that says like, tell me what worked for you, what didn't. I always joke, I've had a lot of therapy, it's all good, tell me the truth, And they said, well, it seems like you kind of have an agenda. And my response was, I don't kind of have an agenda, I have an agenda, right? And they're like, oh, okay, right? So I just feel like I put it out there, what the expectations are and those kinds of things. And then there are ways to talk about it in class. This is beyond the scope of this particular conversation about what to do and how to intervene and what to say. And what I will say is that when someone feels attacked or gets defensive, they will listen to nothing that you say. So somebody says something shitty, right? Something racist, something homophobic, something transphobic. We don't know what to do. We want to address it. It may have actually hurt us personally too. Right? If it's a community we belong to, it may feel very painful. But when we go for it, they will shut it down and hear nothing, right? So some of the other techniques are to humanize, focus on the impact instead of the intent. I know you as a student, I know you would never want to say anything hurtful, but we might want to consider how that would feel to someone who belongs to that community. If it's not a community I belong to, so for example, I am not a person of color, but if my students say something racist in class or something that seems racially insensitive, I'll say, I want to tell you how that made me feel. That really made me feel uncomfortable. I feel badly about that. I don't like, does that make sense? And that's really on all of us, right? We gotta lift that weight for everybody, okay? All right, so that's the mistreatment or maltreatment. So when we asked a number of questions about campus climate. One of the questions we asked said, classes I have taken were accepting of gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, etc. individuals. And what we find is that queer identified folks, so higher numbers indicated less accepting. Okay, that was less true for them, okay? That queer spectrum individuals saw their classes as less accepting than their heterosexual counterparts. And this was significant at 0.05, okay? I think some of that may be about the climate itself, what are those kinds of things, like if people say things. I think another area we really have to start evaluating and thinking about is curricular, right? Is there representation in the curriculum? You can't be what you can't see, right? And so if you go into a classroom and you learn all these things and you only read books by straight white guys, that is not, for folks who are not straight white guys, that doesn't feel always super accepting, welcoming, warm. Susan.
I was in a PD situation during Flex Week.
Okay.
And we were
Yeah.
And there was a science teacher there who just could not in any way see it relevant in the science class. And so we were
Yep.
trying to explain why it was important in a science class.
Yeah.
But I think that some professors just don't see it as related to their topic, and so
Yeah.
they don't do it.
I think that's true, right? So it seems like really obvious why it's relevant in human sexuality, right? And then people in math will say, like, this isn't relevant to me or whatever, but it is, because it's about your students' abilities to learn and creating a welcoming environment there. And even I would argue, so I have a 15, almost 16-year-old and an almost 12-year-old. And one of the things that I have noticed over their time in school, especially they have math page every day. Anybody who's got kids can relate to the one page of math every day, right? If you look at the word problems, my whole life, word problems were Mary and John. How many of you feel me? Every one of them, right? What has been happening over time is they're changing the names to be more inclusive. They're changing the dynamics to be more inclusive. These are important things to kids who sit in your classroom who aren't named Mary and John. So yes, in math it works. In science it works. Hey, by the way, how did we get the term transgender? It's a chemistry reaction. That's a conversation where someone might think like, oh, I had a conversation, I will not say with whom or on what campus, but a campus, somebody teaching sort of anatomy and physiology and those kinds of things, and they were asking me, how would I include this stuff in curriculum? I said, well, you must talk about intersex. Silence. You don't even mention it, I wouldn't go over it at all. Nope. Right? Not because this person's bad and not because they're trying to, like, that's not what I mean in any way, shape, or form. But it never occurred to them that that is an important discussion to be having. And I think you're right, Susan, that it is a hard sell to folks sometimes outside of our sort of, psychology and English and stuff like that. But it is actually relevant across the board, right? Even who do you talk about? Who are in science, who are the people you talk about? Do you give background stories to the folks who made important discoveries? Do you go out of your way to find out, there was an African-American scientist who just developed a glove for the hand that translates ASL into into auditory speech? Well, if I were teaching anything in science, I already posted it, and I teach psychology and human sexuality because that's how I roll, that would go out to my whole class. That's important information. Those are things to know. No? Yes?
Yeah, I think this person wanted to
Sure.
do well and saw it as possibly intrusive to ask. But
So we don't force, right? Tell me your pronouns, right? But you could just say, hi, my name's Emily. I use she, her pronouns.
Right.
And then people can feel comfortable telling you theirs. I will tell you, because I always try to out myself first, it's still a struggle for me. I'll be 45 in November. This is new for me. This is new, and I do this work every day. And I still have to stop and think, right? I didn't start actually with, and when you said it, I was like, damn it, it's on my to-do list. And I wasn't, but does that make sense? So there's a learning curve around that as well. By the way, this sort of lessened or less positive experience on campus climate that we found completely consistent with national research. There's really only one other study out there currently on perceptions of campus climate for LGBTQ folks on community college campuses, Garvey et al., 2017, about then. Okay, and found very consistently that they found the campus to be less welcoming, less inviting, less all of those things. If you look at the US Transgender Survey, 16% of trans-identified students left school. They left their college campuses because they did not find it to be a welcoming place. 16% is a lot, right? We also see that there is a difference for folks who identify as queer and a person of color. than for white queer folks. Okay? And for those of you who know about intersectionality, none of that's coming as any surprise to you, right? So the increasing number of marginalized identity one person holds, typically their experience in the world is more challenging. And so what we found was that those folks were on the queer spectrum and identified as a person of color. And some of you are like, I don't understand. How did you get to person of color? Let me tell you. If you were anything other than Caucasian or white, that was the option, right? You could say I'm Caucasian white / white, okay? Or exclusively, excluding anybody who said other, right? Because others were a whole, I don't even know what to say, right? I'm an attack helicopter. That was a common one, actually. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about right now, okay? I'm a narwhal. That happened. Okay, I'm human. That was a big one, right? So other was sort of excluded. But all of the other ethnicities. So you might have said you were white and Asian Pacific Islander, okay? You're a person of color, okay? Or at least for our categorization, you were a person of color. You may not identify that way, that's fine, but for this analysis, that's how that worked. Other was excluded. You know, I mean, we don't, because we're aggregating, the ends were actually bigger. Had we separated out by particular racial or ethnic identities, we'd be able to do nothing, right? Because you'd start getting into really small numbers. And so when we did that, we in fact find that those folks who were on the queer spectrum and a person of color found the campus to be significantly less welcoming and accepting than white, Caucasian, and queer, okay? And because these things all intersect, right? It's not talking about one identity in the exclusion of another. It's talking about holistically people's very complicated identities. All of us hold multiple identities, and all of them are important to us. Okay. So gender identity. So we asked folks they could indicate that they were a trans woman, a trans man, cisgender woman, cisgender man, genderqueer non-binary, gender nonconformity, gender non-conforming, I can talk today, or that multiple gender identities. So if they checked multiple of those boxes, does that make sense? Then they would become multiple gender identities. Why are my boxes? This is so frustrating. And again, we kind of aggregated them in a way which was similar to what I was talking about before, where, you know, I think given my age, we sort of talk very much about this as being like trans women, trans men, and then cisgender women and men, right? That is not how young people experience their lives, okay? Study out of UCLA, Williams Institute, 34% of 12 to 18-year-olds in California identify as gender nonconforming. That's a huge amount, right? It's just a very different landscape today. So we're really talking about a spectrum, a trans spectrum, okay? So here with the trans spectrum, people were classified in that way if they did not indicate that they were exclusively cisgender. So we did have some folks who said, go ahead. Tell me more. Yeah. I think it's 27. I misspoke. I think I said 33%. 27%. 12 to, yes, young Californians.
I think a lot of people look at this and see we had 36%, and they think that data point is so huge, but it really makes that 27%, when you see those two together, it's not so far apart.
No.
It seems. So I just think that is so important.
Yeah, and so here's my guess. This number goes up each year we do this. Because the center is planning to do this biannually, so every 2 years, actually, because we can't pull it off every year. There's no way, the amount of hours this took. And my guess is that we will see that percentage identifying on the trans spectrum increasing. And just so everyone's clear, someone might have said, I'm a cisgender woman and I identify as genderqueer. That would put you on the trans spectrum for the purposes of this study. Again, just so everyone's clear, excluding anybody who said other.
Did you, I don't remember if you said this in the beginning.
That's okay. Don't.
Did you provide definitions?
Yes. So that's actually an excellent point, and I didn't tell you that beforehand. Yes. So a whole definition sheet, and I could pull for you if you wanted to look at it, was provided. So if we're talking about paper pencil, it was the last page. If we're talking about electronically, it was there at the beginning, and they could go back and forth to it as much as they wanted. Because there certainly were folks who were like, I don't know what this means. Absolutely, I understand. It's right there on that last page. We had a script. The script included, if anything is unclear to you, here's the definitions, those kinds of things. All right, because I was very lucky to work with 4 students who served as my research assistants that I got from the research methods class in the honors Psi Beta club, so they were great. And what we see, I think, which is more than many people would think, about 14% of folks on campus identifying as somewhere on the trans spectrum. And that translates, because we have like 38,000 enrolled students or something like that, about 4,000 students, just by extrapolation. I don't know that we have 4,000. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to put it in some numerical context for you. That's a lot. That's a lot. So when we asked whether or not folks hid their gender identity, we saw very common things again. Okay, about a third of folks hiding, or 30%. A little bit more hiding from fellow students than professors here, but really essentially almost the same amount. And if they were mistreated. So here's, again, we see a consistent pattern, and then we see something kind of interesting. The consistent pattern is that students are more likely reporting that they're being mistreated by fellow students than by professors. As a professor, this makes me feel good, okay? At least on one level, right? I mean, it makes me feel bad, but it also makes me feel good. But what we also see is that more people comparatively are being mistreated for their gender identity than are being mistreated for their sexual orientation, right? So 9% here, and I think it was like 5% for sexual orientation, give or take some tenths, okay? So this, another way is that this discussion about pronouns and gender identity and the trans spectrum, we need to do some work here, right? People don't necessarily understand. People don't know what to do, okay? And folks have some bias, right?
I was going to say, or they perfectly understand.
Okay, yes, that's true too. That's a good point. So these are some of the examples. Purposely misgendering me, mean looks, being told that that's not my actual gender. I have been told that my choice of pronoun, they, isn't grammatically correct, and that my identity, non-binary, does not exist. Teachers say it's too hard to learn every student's pronouns, but somehow not if the student is cisgender. And I am routinely informed that I'm in the wrong bathroom, sometimes by people looking at the sign on the door and then at me, sometimes by the obvious reaction by people, and sometimes by people asking or telling me I'm in the wrong bathroom. I go out of my way to use a non-gendered bathroom, but it's often in use. There's actually just depressing. I am working, so the district has very, very, very kindly provided me with financial support. Basically, they bought me out of my teaching contract to work for the district on these issues. So one of the issues that I'm looking at are inclusive building practices. You know, what should our building contracts look like? What's the appropriate number of non-gender bathrooms? Why don't we have multi-stall, all-gender bathrooms? They have them at almost all the UCs. The cost of it is a sign. No new building, no new nothing. It's literally just flipping over the sign, right? So some of these kinds of things. And so some of the work that I've been doing is looking at the research on, how shall we say, opposition to this, right? And some of it is about like, oh, well, that's not going to make people safe. The number of, it's generally gender nonconforming folks, right? So the most common is masculine presenting cisgender women getting harassed in the women's restroom. The percents of the cops being called, people being followed, people, I mean, it's really awful, right? And as those of us in this room who serve our students, and we have classrooms, and then they have to go out, and they, people need to use the restroom, take care of their own business, right? Well, there are only on campus like 5 gender-neutral bathrooms or all-gender bathrooms. Here, the closest one is in administration. Then you got to go over to student center and services. What if you're over in science? How long is it going to take you to get to the bathroom and get back? I use the all-gender bathrooms because my students try to talk to me while I'm going to the bathroom. And it's crazy, right? And what happens is I go, right, to go, like this, I teach right next door a lot of the time, so I'm, over there in the lower of the library waiting out there. One says staff, so I'll use it sometimes, but I do pay attention. There's a line, and it takes a long time to get through. Well, I have a very privileged position. I stand at the front of the class. You can't be late if your teacher ain't there, right? Kind of the rules of the game. But if you're a student and your teacher's not really understanding what that situation is, that's really difficult. There's actually a lot of research on trans and gender nonconforming folks with increased rates of bladder infections, UTIs, all of those kinds of things. They actually attempt to not use the restroom for the entire day. Dehydration, all of those kinds of things. It's a real issue. It's a real issue. So we both have to work on the level of when we build new buildings, what's the plan? And what do we do with our existing facilities? Because it's not good enough to just say, well, it just sort of sucks, right? Because there are options, there are things that we can do. We just have to be creative and thoughtful about them. We're working on our PE locker rooms right now, which is a lot. But we have a very standard 1970s open shower design. That is not working. No one's using them. In fact, I did just a quick little survey, went in and I just asked how many people are taking shower in a day, in a 20, you have people sitting there. How many people do you think are taking a shower? I counted on one hand. So all this space, and 4 people in 20, well, why do you think that might be? I don't know, I teach, so my students tell me. I take my PE class at the end so I can go home right afterwards. I change in my car. Right, throw water on my face and call it good. Right, open lockers, same scenario. This doesn't only affect queer and trans folks, right? Any community that with body privacy, right? That's just not going to work for them. And I take my PE classes here because I would try to fit it into my, schedule. So, and I'm not going to change with my students, right? Because that's a whole nother thing, right? So then you're in the bathroom and you're using the handicap stall, which is not what it's meant for. And if anybody needs it, I'm taking it up. And I got one foot up there and, and clothes on my head and trying to pull on my PE, right, to get ready and then change back out. And I'm not concerned about my safety. I'm just concerned that I don't want to be that close to my students. So, we have to think about those kinds of issues. So campus climate and gender identity. So when we ask folks, do you consider ARC to be a transphobic campus? Perhaps not surprisingly, trans-spectrum folks felt that was much more consistently true, okay, than cisgendered folks. And individuals are harassed on campus due to their gender identity. Again, trans-spectrum folks saw that a lot more than cisgender folks did. I did not put a slide in there, and I should have. I apologize. So here's the thing. We also asked students, do you know how to report incidences of bias and maltreatment? Do you know what to do if you were at the restroom and somebody's yelling at you? Do you know what to do? Many of you in here are like, I don't know what to do, right? That's okay. And less than 50%. I'd say 40% said they knew what to do. And they were probably wrong, actually. So every campus has an equity officer. Ours is? Correct. Yeah, exactly. And that's who we make our reports to, right? You can come to me. If it happens, I'm the AB 620 officer, and then I will funnel it to Kate. But people do not know how to do it. And part of that is twofold, right? Part of it is if we don't know, then we can pretend like it's all okay. But the other part of that is we need to know so that we can affect action. Okay? So we really do need to publicize the process for reporting incidences of bias or maltreatment. And as you start doing that, we had you know, again, I'm not going to give too much detail, but on our campus, for example, a trans woman of color was on campus interacting in a campus area. Something upset them. It was a customer service kind of deal, and the cops got called on them, right? They weren't violent. They weren't threatening anybody. Okay, that's not great. So what do we do? Why did the person who was interacting with this person feel like this necessitated a call to the police, right? Not threatening, not even yelling, right? We need to know that, not to go me, 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 but to say, all right, what do we do different? Let's talk about it, okay? Pride Center allied training or bias and maltreatment training for all departments and units. Focusing on the appropriate terminology, the use of pronouns, some of it's just practice, honestly, as well as specific policies such as restroom policies. Many of my students do not know the restroom policies at ARC, which is use any bathroom that conforms with your identity. Whatever you want is fine. So I will have students who say to me, that's not okay. Well, it is. And if you're not comfortable with it, you're welcome to use the single stall bathroom. You should make them. Yeah, that's not a thing, and we're not doing that, right? But if you don't know, you're like, oh, that's my thing. Training focused on how to identify and handle homophobic or transphobic comments made in class, because really, oftentimes we just don't know what to do, right? And the role and responsibility of LRCCD employees to honor and protect queer and trans spectrum students. So this is our job, right? These are our students, and this is our job to inform ourselves and to protect our students as they come through, as you would any of your students. Okay, so if you have any questions or you want to receive any additional information about that, you can call me, you can email me. This used to be true, but the redesign, that like the length, I don't even know where it is on there now, but I absolutely, of course, have a PDF of it. I would be happy to send it to you. It goes into inordinate amounts of extra detail around these things and anything that you might want to know or any of those kinds of things. Yes, Susan? Sure, yeah, so anybody who wants a copy of the presentation, just, shoot me an email or tell me after class and I'll be happy to send it along to you. That's not a problem at all, and I'll just throw in the study as a freebie, right? Buy one, get one free. All right. Anybody? Yeah?
So the previous slide showed
Yep.
like future steps.
Yep.
So the training focused on how to identify and handle those kinds of
Yeah.
comments made in class. Are there plans for any of that this semester?
Yeah, so I already launched it, right? I did it at the Flex on Thursday, which was kind of my practice run, like, how did this work? Turned out I had too much information because it's really scenario based. And then everybody who was in BSS, I trained them over convocation. And so if that is a training that you're interested in for your department or some specialty area that we work in or anything like that, shoot me an email, we'll get you on the calendar, and we'll get it done. That's not a problem. Yeah, totally do that. That's not a problem at all.
Or just through the CTL?
Yeah, I mean, so college hour, this one's this college hour, and then I'll do one at Flex, and so any of those, but I gotta tell you, the best bang for the buck for me is honestly going to your all's like meeting. Yeah, and everybody's there, right? So when I did BSS over convocation, whether they wanted to or not, this was what convocation was for them, for our area meeting. So, that was a lot of us at once. Because often what happens, we kind of have a trickle in, and I'm happy to do it for 5 people or 500 people, but it's sort of more impactful if you can hit the big, right? So a department meeting, really, convocation is like the best when there's a division meeting, and I'm happy to do that, or whatever y'all want. That's totally fine with me. Tyler, no questions. Come on.
I actually did have a question.
Okay.
3 or 4 slides back.
Okay. Oh, there?
One more.
Okay. Up or down?
Forward.
Forward. Other way. Sorry. Okay.
The mistreatment of gender identity.
Yeah.
Did you
Sep-
find,
Go ahead.
just given the current political climate, or did you even look at this,
So, okay, I thought that's not what you were going to ask me. It's an excellent question, and now I want to go back to the data and look at that. What I thought you were going to ask me was, did people say they were being mistreated for their gender identity, and they meant their cisgender female identity? And what we did find, so I have not done the analysis yet. I mean, I've done some of it, but it's a little, you know. I also, you guys may remember, ran this with faculty and staff data, right? And so that was only online or whatever. And what I saw a lot in those comments actually related to being female identified in the world as opposed to trans spectrum identified. So that's going to be interesting to think about ways of doing that. So what I will say is that, I mean, I guess I could go back and look at those demographics and see if they were saying that. I will tell you that we did get a number of, so we kind of, look, I mean, you got to do what you got to do. You do this kind of work, people say shitty stuff to you. Sorry, it's just a reality. Anybody who's done any sort of equity work or whatever, people just say, right? So they send me nasty emails and they say mean things about me or whatever, I don't care. So we kind of have like a hate wall. It just makes us feel better. And so some of the comments were things like, I am being discriminated against because I am normal and I sleep with women, and yes, and the race part would always come in. I was like, yeah, yes. So that would be in the narrative. And some of the narratives were, you know, they were mean-spirited. You know, we didn't pull them necessarily out of the data. They weren't a ton of them, but, you know, you're reading them and you're like, all righty. You know, so it's really interesting. I mean, I could easily go back and sort of run some pretty basic demographics, right? And then pull those numbers and look to see what some of the, I might have to like really, you know, take some deep breaths before out. Dennis.
Some of the data, the K-12 data, looked at the intersection of race and identity.
Yeah.
And found some pretty significant issues. And what I'm wondering is, in the next go around, if there are plans to maybe take into that a little bit more.
So I did look at it, like, so we did classify as people of color, and then we did look at those things. I think our N sizes start getting a little bit small, especially when we're talking about, for example, trans spectrum and a person of color. Does that make sense? That did not come out significant. The one with POC and queer spectrum did. We would have to, and I mean, there's, you know, and Tyler, you could talk more about this, right? Is that the various campuses are interested in looking at campus climate in various different ways. And I'm not going to get, I want to say it's Stacy, Stassi, Stussy, the survey thingy. Folsom's doing it. What is, you know what I mean? It's got like a, oh, that's it. I was like, Stassi? Yeah, that sounds right. Where it's kind of like, what's the campus climate? I mean, really, in order to get sufficient numbers to really drill down and start doing this work, is it has to be a more unified plan, and you have to worry about survey burnout, fatigue, right? People get tired of being asked. If it was incorporated in some larger but meaningful, does that make sense? And so it gets tough, Dennis. So the answer to your question is yes, absolutely, always. And then there's some logistical hurdles to that. I mean, I think if we could survey every single student, I say yes. But yeah. Question?
I just want to see the first page, please.
The first page, like the very first slide? Okay. Like that slide? No, next slide? Okay. Oh, well, that's okay. So I assume we got ARC down. Okay. LGBTQ and then plus. Okay. So what's L stand for? Any guesses? Lesbian. Okay. G stands for? Gay. B? Okay. All right. Bisexual. Okay. T? Trans. Q? Queer. And plus, we sort of add on as an efficiency. So, people rightfully all want their identities acknowledged. The acronym just starts getting really long. So we kind of add a plus and say, we're here for everybody. Does that help? You're absolutely welcome. Thank you for asking, Susan.
Because I was out in my car getting my glasses, I missed how many responses.
1,201. Okay.
That's great.
Thank you. That was a lot of work. I was like, I ain't gonna lie, I'm tired. We actually did it fall of last year. So would that be fall 2018? We stopped data collection December the 1st, and then over the winter break, I analyzed the data. Yeah. And then by about March, because that's how it goes, right? I had like a workable draft that I felt good about.
And I know the purpose of this is a climate assessment. There's, and then the state, on our intake survey,
Yeah.
CCC apply, we
Yeah.
have some questions. Is there any way we're ever going to be able to figure out some completion data to determine if there's disparate impact for queer students?
So if you look at the student success matrix, and Tyler, please jump in if I say something that's not quite right or you want to augment or add to this discussion. So if you actually look at the student success matrices that were sent out to us, you can follow on the link. What you do see is disproportionate impact. So depending on what you look at, in addition, we have somebody who works at the hub who actually did an internship for the state chancellor's office and analyzed the same data. So I'm going to take a big old brush and make a broad statement, okay? If you look at persistence, you look transfer rates, you look at GPA, you look at units, about a 10% decrement between queer identified students. So L, B, and T. It's only sexual orientation and trans, like the questions are not good. And the way they ask them are not, they're bad. They were better than nothing, right? But they're not super awesome, right? That's a whole nother front we move on all the time. But that being said, that's basically what you'll see. You see disproportionate impact. And again, this is, I have different research for different presentations, but when I met with Brian, I kind of went through and said, look, yeah, in and of ourselves, right? So if you identify the queer trans community, you have these decrements. We're also overrepresented in every other one of the disproportionately impacted groups. So for example, 50% of our sample, people of color. That's true on campus, right? If you look at low income, female sexual minorities, so essentially gay, lesbian, bisexual women, make less money than straight women. That's out there, like that's a thing. Homelessness, totally LGBTQ youth, 40%. Foster care, 1.5 to 2 times more LGBTQ kids in foster care than out of foster care. So every one of the other disproportionately impacted groups, we're in all of those. So yes, the identity alone shows up in disproportionate impact, and we are in every other one of those groups. And my larger point isn't to say that those other groups are not important, but if services do not also acknowledge, support, and create a positive environment for their queer and trans identity, we're missing the boat. It's not going to happen. Tyler.
And I would also add that it's probably a more severe impact because of the nature of the delivery of the CCC apply question, that they don't ask it to anyone under 19.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think of young folks that might not yet be out, that are filling this out with their parents or something like that, they're not going to.
Yeah, so Tyler and I have had this conversation, and then Betty and I have had this conversation a number of times. So, yes, sorry. Nobody gets asked, well, it's questionable, right? Definitely nobody gets asked before 18. Data Dictionary says 19. I don't really understand. And here's another little fun fact. You get asked once. So I am living at home. I fill it out. I'm 19, let's just say, so I get the question. I will never be asked the question again, ever. My entire time as a Los Rios student. you will never count on this data. That is wholly inconsistent with identity psychology. That is just not how these things work, right? And so that's really problematic. And then, and I'm not going to get all of my numbers correct, so of the percent that ever see the question, what percent then even answer the question? You just keep getting it smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So how does that look? We've sort of talked about a little bit, like, you know, would this be something where we could ask on the supplemental application, you know, those kinds of things. We understand that people's identities change, both racially and ethnically, how they identify may change, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity. The questions themselves are problematic, for sure. And don't encompass, we're not nimble this way, right? We don't evolve in the ways in which language and experience and identity evolve. Even 5 years ago, talking about a trans spectrum would have seemed pretty outside of what was the common discussion. Question? Okay, I just saw your hand. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Oh, thank you, that's nice. I was like, concerns, so many concerns. Okay. Yes. Oh, thank you. So we'll be doing it again in 2 years. I'll probably get this faculty staff data done by then. I don't know. I think there's a sign-in sheet, Christina, yes? Did we ever get our little, no, all right, yeah, that's okay. All right, again, if you want the copy of the data, or, well, if you want a copy of the data, let me know. But if you want the study, the presentation,